Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Loss, Conversations in Grief Education and Healing. I am Shari Dworkin-Smith. That's SHARIDWORKINSMITH. And I am a certified grief educator, a psychic medium, and a hypnotherapist. As a grief educator and coach, I help people dealing with all kinds of grief and loss to better navigate their journey. There are a lot of different kinds of grief, and sometimes we don't even know that what we're stressing about is actually connected to grief. So there are far too few resources available, and through my work, I work to help shine a light on the resources that are available to let people know that there is help. There are people out there talking about grief, and to help people better understand their feelings and how grief is showing up in their lives. And the path is different for everyone, and honestly, every loss is different. So hopefully, when we are dealing with these things, we can learn and grow and do more than just get through and do more than just trudge along. So the goal is to come back to a place of living, a place of being at peace in our lives without feeling the pressure of moving on and getting back to normal that we experience so much in our instant gratification society. So here at Beyond the Loss, we're talking about grief, which I know is not really a fun or sexy subject, but if you or someone you know is struggling with deep depression or grief, please know that help is available. The National Suicide Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just by calling or texting 988. That's it, just 988, and you will be connected to confidential support for yourself or someone that you care about. This is a big part of the work that I do. And if I say something that resonates with you, please don't hesitate to reach out and let's set up a time to see if maybe grief coaching could be right for you. You can most easily find me, of course, on my website at sharidworkinsmith.com, and just send a quick note and I'll get back to you as fast as I can. I am really honored and excited today to have my sister with us. My sister, Noreen Dworkin, is a writer and an activist, and she currently leads a very important local news organization here in Central Florida called Vox Populi, not to be confused with Has Been Hotel. Noreen was married to her former husband, Stuart, for 15 years. And Stuart was a good person and a good father. And unfortunately, various issues, notably around drugs and alcohol, ended their marriage. And this past summer, after having already been divorced for several years, Stuart died. And my sister and her son, my nephew, were now left dealing with very different kinds of grief. I wanted to invite my sister here today to talk and share about her journey. So Noreen, my sister, my love, thank you for coming and being here. Welcome. And thank you so much for being willing to share about your journey.
Thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm here. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy to share my experience, strength, and wisdom.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I think very often that people think when a spouse dies, the only response is deep grief and anguish. And that's not always the case, is it?
No, not always the case. I mean, certainly there was a lot of sadness when Stuart died. There was, disbelief, but there was also a lot of anger when he died, because he left a real mess that had to be cleaned up, and we're still cleaning up that mess.
Can you talk
he wasn't
a little
particularly
bit about where you and Stuart were in your relationship when he passed?
No, we were not. We had come to the point where we were amicable and we were on friendly terms, because we had a child together, and we were in a good place where we could talk to each other and be friendly together. We weren't married, but we were still family. We had known each other since well, we met each other when we were in college. So we've known each other since we were 18. So that's a really long time. And I mean,
Yeah.
our son is 20 now. Um, so that's a long time to have somebody, in your life and to know somebody. So anyway.
Yeah. You talked about the shock of, and I remember, I mean, I still can hear it in my head the morning that you called me and just simply said 3 words, Stuart is dead. And I was sitting, next to my own husband, and I thought, oh my gosh, just my own shock of that reality. Can you talk a little bit about your feelings? And I understand the anger that you had mentioned with, a mess, and certainly don't have to go into any details, but your grief was really different than your son's. And, for privacy, we'll just leave his name out of it. But,
Mhm.
you have a 19-year-old now, just recently 20-year-old, having to deal with the loss of his father. And, for you dealing with the loss of a partner, you have an ability to express the differences that you may have seen or felt in those two very different kinds of grief?
Oh, sure. Well, for for me, it was odd because we were separated, and so he was no longer my partner, and yet there was still this profound sadness and shock, and not kind of knowing what to do with all of that when this person who had been such a big part of my life had passed. um, and then also sort of being cast in this role of having to take care of all of the things that a wife would normally do in that situation, and yet not being the wife, and having to accept everybody else's condolences as if I were, but I was not, and sort of
Mhm.
processing all of that, um, and not wanting to appear as if I was taking on the role of the grieving widow when I really wasn't the grieving widow. I was grieving something, but not particularly that. My grief was so complicated in that, um, I was grieving the loss of somebody who was a real value to our planet because he was a genius and he had so much to give, and that he lost the fight against alcohol was a real tragedy. Um, but he was also a chaos maker, and there's still chaos that we're having to deal with. For my son, he really lost his father, and he had lost his father even before his father had died because his father had kind of absented himself from the relationship, and so for him, it's very much this absence that he's feeling very profoundly, and I think it's that loss that he's grieving.
And there's always the hope that someone might find their way back from drugs and alcohol. That the hope that there could be a relationship, while this person is still alive. I remember at the funeral, somebody had said that he had moved to be closer to where your son is going to school, and I didn't know that, and that tells me that he also was maybe having hope for a future relationship. And when the person passes, that disappears, and it's almost as
Yes,
if it's a
he
double loss.
yes, and I think he did have hope. I talked about this at the funeral. When we were going through his effects, um, he didn't have a lot with him when he passed. We found out later were a lot of his things were in storage, but one of the things that he had with him was a gray suit that I remember buying with him years and years before, and that suit to me symbolized that he had some kind of hope of making it back into the workforce, and coming back to make something of his life. So that of all the things he had in his possession, a gray suit it really stood out from the rest of the things that were in the suitcases. So it really affected me to see that suit that we had purchased all those years ago. Um, so, and I know for our son, he's processing this, very differently. He's very afraid now that he's going to lose, me, his other parent, and he's gotten very kind of clingy in a certain way. He's very focused on like death, and that things are that he could lose me the way he lost his father.
Yeah.
So that's something that has worried him a great deal.
It's a very scary thing when a young person loses a parent. It's very ungrounding. It really, kids are so grounded and I have these two parents, or this is what my reality looks like. And when that reality is shaken so violently that way, it really is creates a situation of having to like look around and feel like, okay, where do I feel secure? Where can I feel that safe feeling? So, grateful for all of us that, when my husband and I chose to move back to Florida from California, 21 years ago, that you and Stuart chose to come along, and then mom and dad came up from South Florida. So for the first time in our adult lives, we were all living in the same area. So it's really wonderful that he has that wonderful support system just right here. That we're all in one place, which is really, it's wonderful for all of us. So.
Yeah, I mean that was part of the plan, was that he would have all of the family around him to help him feel loved and secure and all of that. I mean, even before Stuart passed, we kind of had a feeling that because he was an alcohol abuser, and he didn't take particularly good care of himself. So something like that, for people who are familiar with alcoholism, that it ends in one of three ways: jails, institutions, or death. And, so our son he told me he was not surprised, shocked, but not surprised, that he had been expecting it for quite some time, because, he knew that his dad didn't take very good care of himself. So, there was one time where we couldn't find him. He had been trying to reach his father for, I don't know, maybe a month, and hadn't heard back. And so I hadn't known about this. And when he finally told me, we went looking for him, and we started to put calls out to friends, and we went to the places where he usually hung out. And, for a little while, we were really scared that we were going to, find him, maybe in his apartment. We actually broke into his apartment and, just to see if he was there. And he was not. And finally, we found him in a bar. So.
Well, it's the pattern, right? Were there things that surprised you as you navigated this whole situation? I mean, I know that I was surprised by my own feelings when Stuart passed. And, just for a little context for our listeners, my sister is one of my best friends. And I think, we both say that about each other, but that was not always the case. We grew up very contentious, really adversarial. We were not friends. We did not get on. We were often not even well in the same room. And Stuart was really the catalyst for that change. Stuart really was the bridge maker that started to this path for the two of us to come to this wonderful relationship that we have now. And I always wanted a brother, because growing up, my no offense, but my sister was crap. So I always wanted a big and then and so it was really so lovely to have a big brother. As weird as he was, it was really lovely to have a big brother for a long time. And one of my favorite stories about Stuart was when we would first start to go over to people's houses, because Stuart was an only child of only children, and come from a food family. And so we came over for
Hmm.
dinner, and there was four of us, myself, my husband, and our two children, and we were going to have hot dogs for dinner. And so Stuart made sure that everybody had a hot dog. And I'm
A
raising
hot dog.
boys. So he's like, there's six of us. I made six hot dogs. And I thought, is that the appetizer?
Uh-huh.
But he learned. No, we learned because eventually we had these wonderful holiday meals where Stuart was an amazing cook and they're an incredible chef, and we just
Hmm.
ate like kings for the holidays. And so there were those things that really, I was surprised for myself, the level of sadness, because he had been gone from our lives really for such a long time. That really surprised myself. And so I wonder if there were things that surprised you as you were navigating this whole situation of his passing, and having to, suddenly go to the funeral, and suddenly having to, get the pods of his belongings and things like that.
I think what surprised me was the amount of guilt that I felt,
Mm.
because again, I had worked quite hard. We did have a long and contentious divorce, and I had worked quite hard to separate myself from him. And then once that was all over, we did end up coming to a point of amiability. Um, but there had been a point where he had reached out to me by text and asked if I missed him, and the truth was I did not. And I saw that as a ploy to kind of like sneak back into my life. And so I never responded to that. And I didn't think anything about that um, until he died. And then I felt enormous guilt about that,
Yeah.
because I knew that he was, when I learned the circumstances of his death, I knew that he was by himself.
Yeah.
And I, I, I decided that instead of trying to like smarm his way back into my life, he probably was very lonely, and he was just looking for somebody to connect with. And I ended up feeling very, very badly and very sad and very guilty about that. And just, I had terrible, terrible feelings of sadness around how he died, um, because it was not an easy death, and he was by himself. Um, and it took quite some time for anyone to figure out that he had died, before a wellness check was done and before he was discovered. So he was alone. And that breaks my heart. That really breaks my heart.
Yeah.
So,
It's
and I'm going to live with that for a long time.
okay. Is there any advice on that you would share with others who might be dealing with the similar kind of complicated grief of, I really love that person? And in my work I talk a lot about, teach people about boundaries and about how we can love people over there. I love you, I don't want you in my life. And so we can have love for that person with still having this boundary. um, and so I wonder if you have any advice or things that maybe helped lessen the pain for you as you were navigating this situation, that you could share that might help other people?
I don't know if it's advice, but because I was having a rough time, as I was, kind of going through this and still having to do the things that I have to do every day, um, people around me could see that I was feeling a little raw. And people who I'm even normally prickly or contentious with, because that's kind of built into my job description, gave me grace and were kind and were patient with me and gave me space to talk. And some even said they'd pray for me, which is not something that I normally, think much about, but I was grateful for the sentiment and found myself talking to people who I wouldn't normally discuss this kind of stuff with, but was really grateful for their support and felt better for their um, sentiments and their understanding and their hugs from people that I never expected this kind of support for. So I guess if I had any kind of advice, I would say be open to support from wherever it comes, because people will surprise you and with what they will offer. And
Yeah.
the kind of people who stepped up were not the ones who I thought would even care, and were very helpful.
I hear that
So
a lot in my work, that people are often in grief, surprised that the people they thought would be there rock solid right there are often not. And the people that they never would have expected were the ones that, have come, with support from unlikely places. And, kindness matters, regardless of, where it comes from. If we can be kind, it is a good step to help us move through anything. What about any kind of?
I'm sure that I'm sure that my friends also were right there. I have a close friend who I've known since I was in first grade, and she was, right there for me. And other people, also called to make sure I was okay. But, in my job, I'm often in an adversarial position with people, and those people who, I'm usually standing toe to toe with showed compassion, and I was
Well, that's
surprised
very
by that.
encouraging in our polarizing society right now, because you do work in politics and local news, that even in adversarial positions we can still find a place of compassion, which gives me hope for for humanity, gives
Yeah,
me hope for our society as we go forward.
yeah,
What
it
about
was true.
advice to
Yeah,
give for other parents who are parenting a child who has lost a parent? The things that maybe you saw that were helpful for your son, and that were, you know, that may have been helpful for him as he was navigating this.
sure. That's a little easier, because I just left myself open to whatever he needed, um, and I just let myself listen to when he needed to talk. So many
Right.
times, parents feel that they need to, jump in and see if they can, you know, help by, doing something, when really they just need to be able to say what's on their mind. And so I just stay quiet and I listen to what he needs to say. And um, a lot of what he really needed, which was a little surprising to me, but I was okay with it, was he needed not to sleep by himself. So
Mhm.
he wanted to, crawl back into bed with me, and he didn't want to have to sleep by himself. So, you know, I let him come back and, sleep with mom again.
I love that. I love that. Um, I know that was a big part of his formative memories as well. You know, I share this picture from time to time with my Greek clients because we all live, you know, our lives in this kind of a box, and we all have this pain button that is just part of existence. It's part of just living our life on this planet. And when things happen, we get this pain, this grief, this trauma that just explodes into our box, and that it feels like any breath that we take is going to hit this button and just trigger and set everything off. And over time, this part will get smaller, even though the button will always be there. That over time, this part does get smaller. So it's just a little different way of thinking about it and how we navigate the process. So Noreen, I want to thank you so much for being here, being part of the conversation today. Thank you for sharing so openly your experience. I know that these things will help others. And people can find you at wintergardenvox.com. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So anybody that's in Central Florida, if you're in Winter Garden, Ocoee or Oakland, and you'd like to know more about what's going on in your local communities, be sure to check out Winter Garden Vox. Thank you, Noreen. I look forward to talking to you a little bit later. As for me, you can find me live on my Facebook page on Mondays at 4:30 Eastern for channeled information and collective card readings for the week, where I share channeled information and individual oracle card readings, and all those videos are also posted on my YouTube channel and, of course, on TikTok. We're all struggling with something, and isn't it nice that we don't have to do it alone? So whatever kind of grief you're carrying, whether you're grieving the loss of a person, a pet, a job, a relationship, just remember that your feelings are valid. Grief is normal, and it is definitely not linear. Some days are going to be fine, and some days are just going to suck. If you'd like more information about the work that I do, please be sure to visit my website at sharidworkinsmith.com. Thanks for joining me today and allowing me to be here with you as we continue to navigate the complex emotions that come beyond the loss. We'll see you next week.